Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 400 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
Are you feeling mentally drained or foggy, even when your business is thriving? That's exactly what Eric will be talking about today. How better brain health can help you think clearer, lead better, and avoid burnout. He'll share science-backed steps that busy entrepreneurs and small business owners can use to boost focus, energy, and long-term performance. Our guest today is Eric Collette. He's the CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, a forward-thinking company dedicated to helping people across the U.S. boost their brain and mental health. Eric is a nationally recognized brain health expert, speaker, and consultant with deep experience in dementia care, leadership strategies, and cognitive optimization. With a background in residential care administration and years of teaching at the College of Western Idaho and Boise State University, Eric brings a passion for lifelong learning to every conversation. Since 2000, he's been helping individuals and professionals discover practical ways to think clearer, feel better, and perform at their best. When he's not speaking or coaching, you might find him at the piano or saxophone. He's also spent 25 years teaching music history just for the love of it. Eric, absolute pleasure having you here, sir. Welcome. Do you have a favorite quote or saying?
Oh, thank you. It's a privilege to be with you, Bernie. Yeah, I have lots of favorite quotes. I've been collecting quotes since high school, but one of my favorites is that no one was ever crushed under the burden of a single day. Only when regrets about yesterday and fears about tomorrow are piled on top does today become unmanageable. And I find that that's really true in the lives of people that I serve and in my own life as well.
Is there a business tagline you operate with?
We like to tell people that we're empowering people by helping them optimize their brain health.
So this might sound like an obvious question, but brain health and business success. If you're successful, it's not dumb luck. There might be some luck involved or some chance, but true success to sustain it. Why is brain health so important? It might be an obvious answer, but there might be a little more depth to it than just going 1 + 1 = 2.
I love that question, but I don't think it's necessarily obvious. If it were more obvious, a lot more people would lean into that. I didn't see it until a few years ago after we had worked with hundreds or thousands of people around the U.S. One day, a business leader was talking to me. He was a client, and we had looked at nutrients, hormones, inflammatory markers, metabolic factors, biomarkers, and blood work. And we had looked at lifestyle factors and put together a treatment summary for him, like we do for all of our individual clients. He was working his program and came to me one day and said, "Eric, I thought I needed to read more books on productivity or go to more business master classes or workshops. I thought I needed more skills. But now that my processing speed is 35% higher than it was when we started this, I'm naturally getting a lot more done in the day." That was my real problem. In that moment, I realized there's a difference between software and hardware. So think of the soft skills that you gain in life. Like you read a book about productivity. There are lots of good ones out there because people really do want to get more done in the day. That's like software, and those skills really do matter. But if you load new software on dysfunctional old hardware, we all know what happens in the tech world. My wife has an old iPad that is old enough that you can't even upgrade it to the latest iOS. And there are things that are starting to not work on her iPad, so I need to help her get a new one. But I think the same thing happens when it comes to our brain health. Our brains are our tools in the knowledge economy, and we can think of them as hardware. When we do all of the things that address the fundamentals that are required for the brain to function really effectively, then all of those soft skills that we load on top of it just naturally function better. And vice versa is also true.
We designed our system based on getting a job at 20, turning a widget or digging a ditch for 20 years, maybe 25, getting a watch and leaving, putting your brain in neutral, and either play golf or cribbage and rot. And now that we have an increased lifespan, do we have to look at society different so that we expect different things of ourselves so that we don't let what we think the norms are harm us?
I love how you framed that, Wayne, because I think there are still a lot of people that think that I'm going to work, 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 and then I'm just going to go sit on a beach somewhere. There's actually research on this, and it's not good. It's not promising for people who want to just sit and kick back. Your question reminds me of one of the very first lessons that I learned as a young man starting out in the year 2000. I stumbled on a job working in an assisted living community. I ended up spending 16 years running assisted living and memory care communities. There was a lady that had a room right around from my office. Her name was Mary. Every time I would go visit Mary, who was morbidly obese, she couldn't get out very easily. It was difficult for her to have any sort of mobility, but she tried to stay cognitively and socially active. I'd go visit her, and she would hold up this crooked arthritic finger and say, "Eric, you remember, to rest is to rust." And the research actually bears that out. We need purpose as humans. We need something to aim for. When we fail to be social and we fail to use our cognitive capacity and we don't have something that we're working toward, people don't do very well. Over the course of that 16-year assisted living and memory care career, I saw lots of people who were very successful in their business careers. And within 5 years or less of retiring, they wound up needing professional help because they just fell apart. It wasn't that they fell apart overnight. Things were slowly building up, and they were just ignoring symptoms. And then they retired, and it was like throwing gas on the fire, and things deteriorated.
It almost sounds like scope creep. When you get a project and you say, build me a house or software. And as we're going on, oh, by the way, can we do this tweak or add on, right? In this case, it's like in reverse. I remember hearing a emerge physician say one time, for people that are retiring, the greatest threat to them is not being engaged in something. If you're working like a border collie, always running at hyperspeed, and then you come to a dead stop, not so good. How do you get a person to stay engaged? When you retire, the passion may be kind of waning. How do you pick up that passion elsewhere? How do you find something to help to hook into? It doesn't have to be the same stress level, but have a passion or multiple passions. I learned to play a lot of golf.
It's a great question, and I want to answer it from two perspectives, because some people listening might be thinking, hey, my spouse is just sitting around and I'm really worried about them. How do I get them to do what they ought to do for themselves? And that's a different question than someone listening thinking about themselves and recognizing, hey, I've fallen prey to the human condition, which is drift, and I have drifted off my target here, and what do I need to do about it? So first of all, if you have a spouse or significant other or somebody that you really love and care about, and you see them drifting into inaction and lack of engagement, then I think two things are really helpful. Number one is to ask a more effective question. A lot of us go through life thinking, how do I get this person to do what I want them to do or what they should do? And I don't think that's a very helpful question, because humans hate to be told what to do. We have agency. We like to exercise it. If we start with the question, how do I get him to get off his stuff and do what he should do? That naturally leads to just telling your spouse to go play golf or something. And I don't think that goes very well for most people. But if we change the question and instead ask something like, how could I create the conditions under which this person is more likely to choose to do something helpful or productive? Then I think that changes the narrative a little bit. That allows us to find better solutions. I think we also have to recognize that motivation comes when we're in motion. We should never underestimate the power of taking the next right step. Sometimes we try to help those around us solve a problem that's really 20 steps down the road, instead of just taking the next right step and inviting people to do something that would be helpful. Through a combination of asking good questions that cause someone to think and to consider what they're doing and to take stock of where they are, and then inviting them to take a step instead of a leap or to start running right out of the gate, I think we're more likely to help them move forward. When it comes to ourselves, I think it's important to understand the same principle about motivation. That motivation is a bit of a mirage. Sometimes people sit back and they're just waiting for motivation to slap them upside the head before they take action. But that's not how motivation works. Motivation comes when we motivate, when we get up and we start moving. So we need to just do something and celebrate that victory, and then do the next thing, and then build upon it little by little. Sometimes having some accountability or someone that inspires you to keep taking steps can be helpful along the way. I think those are some things to get people started, at least.
Eric, I find, and Bernie will say yes to this, you're literally singing from my songbook. I actually find my lips moving as you're talking because I so agree with you. They talk a lot about burnout. And one of my concerns about burnout is there's a male propensity to want to set the house on fire and then use burnout as a way to realign what they should have realigned on their own. How do you get them to look at realigning before they set the house on fire?
It's a great question. It's a difficult question, though, because it has to do with helping people see what they're just not naturally seeing. And I think some of that involves helping people take a step back. If you can imagine being down in a city, like in my city of Boise, Idaho, there's lots of trees and lots of streets, as you see in most cities. But there's a place called Table Rock that sits above the city and looks out. If you go up even higher into the mountains, it looks out. And as soon as you go up to a higher place, you see things that you couldn't otherwise see. With those around us, if we can figuratively go on a journey by asking good questions that help them to start seeing things from a different vantage point, then they naturally recognize some things they were missing before. I think we can start to do that when we ask people questions like, what does success look like to you? What are you hoping to accomplish at the end of all of this? How can you take the next right step toward that goal? How do you think these behaviors are serving you related to that goal? As we ask questions and get people thinking, the idea is to help people have realizations on their own that might be powerful for them.
There is a whole science of brain chemistry. One can actually get degrees on them. But have you seen a layman's guide where you can, in 4 to 5 hours, read a book or take a course and get the 30,000-foot view?
I wish that were the case, but I don't think so at all. I think there are these stages that we pass through when we're learning something. At first, we recognize that we're ignorant and we're excited to learn. As we pour the gas on that eagerness and we start learning, we begin to know enough that it opens our eyes, and we start to get to this place where it feels like, wow, we're really getting a sense of what's going on here. And if we push through and continue learning, I think we eventually come out the other side very much like we started, where we're again deeply humbled because now we know enough that we know how much stuff we actually don't know, and it's sobering to think about it. When it comes to the human body or neurochemistry or anything related to how we function physiologically, the more I learn, the more I realize how painfully little we actually know. For example, take neurotransmitters. The whole world wants this really easy handbook on how neurotransmitters work, and they think about something like insulin's a hormone and it relates to sugar. Yes, that is a significant role of insulin, but insulin actually affects every single tissue in the body. And all of the major diseases that we have, with few exceptions, are driven in one way or another by problems with hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood. Insulin affects every tissue. And so if we're going to understand the role of a hormone like that, we got to study a lot of different things and see how insulin affects the ovaries in a woman's body, or how insulin affects things in the brain, or how insulin would affect our skin, and on and on. So that's just one thing. Or take a neurotransmitter like dopamine. People these days are talking a lot about dopamine, and you got to do this to get your dopamine hit. And yet we forget that dopamine is very complex. It's not just about reward and having a quick fix because you did something exciting. Dopamine is essential for movement. And we see that in Parkinson's patients, where one of the classic things that happens in Parkinson's is they have depleted levels of dopamine. If you dig into any neurotransmitter, these neurotransmitters do complex things that affect a lot of different pathways, and the way that they interact with each other is really not all that well understood. We're scratching at the surface here.
Would it be fair to say you have your chemical balance inside you, your hormones, your sodium levels, your salt levels, etc. Then you also have what your body's doing. Are you moving around? Are you going for a walk, doing jogs, runs? The case might be, and to help exercise. And then you have diet that rolls into this. Is this a kind of a balancing? Is there one size fits all, or is it dependent on your age, your sex? If you're a woman who's about to give birth, it'd be different than someone who's male turning 55. Where's my red Corvette, dag nabbit? Is it a mix of things like weather? You have a warm front coming through, hitting a cold front, and then there's a spin into it. Is it a mixed bag of many things, or what?
You ask a good question. I want to answer it with a couple of different things that will allow us to have more perspective on the situation we're up against. I think, number one, we need to appreciate how unique every single individual human system is. So let me give you an example that I bring up with some of my college students. I want them to understand that they're needed in this world. They are necessary. There is no one like them. If I was to ask you, how many variables make you, you, and me? Could you even put a number to it?
We can do the same.
Number.
I thought it was 42. That's the meaning of life. Sorry. Rockford.
I think by the time you add up genetics and nutrient factors and environmental factors and experiences that you had when you were raised and everything else, first of all, I don't think anybody could put a number to it. But I think most people would agree that there are at least more than 52 variables. Well, if we just went with 52, which is the number of cards in a deck of cards, then the question that we're asking is, how many unique shuffles of the deck can you have? The answer is 52 factorial, which is 52 times 51 times 50 on down to 1. And if you do that crazy, ridiculous math problem, you end up with a number so big that I'm not sure what to call it. But here's an analogy. If every shuffle of the deck was a grain of sand, then you could fill the Grand Canyon nearly 4 times before you would have a repeat shuffle. In other words, based on the predicted age of the universe hasn't even been around long enough for there to be a repeat shuffle. So there is no human system like yours or mine. We're absolutely unique. Now, that said, there are principles of physiology that govern how we function. And I think people want the user manual. They want to be able to sit down and say, oh, if I'm 55 and I'm male, then these are all the things that I need to do. And I think that's a little naive. I think what's helpful is to understand principles and learn how to leverage them in our own bodies, because each body is an N of 1 experiment. And nobody will ever care about your body as much as you do. And I certainly care more about my body than anybody else on the planet, because I'm the one that has to live in it and I'm responsible for it. It's a stewardship. And when I learn principles, I have power to try some things and to see what works and then to adjust. So here's four steps that you might consider in this N of 1 experiment. Measure, learn, apply, and adjust. So you measure something that relates to how your body functions. I mentioned insulin earlier. I'll just call on that one. What if you measure your fasting insulin? That's actually predictive of a lot of things in your health. If you understand some things about insulin and you understand that a fasting insulin should be between about 4 and 6, at least with the units of measurement that most labs use, then if you measure your fasting insulin and it's 25, you can say, well, what does the very best research tell me about what I can do about that and how I can deal with that issue. And then you apply what you've learned, and later on, recheck your fasting insulin and make further adjustments. You recognize, is my experiment moving me closer toward what would be optimal for my health? And am I seeing the results in day-to-day life? Or am I missing something? If we apply those principles and recognize that we're always limited by the degree that we measure, if we can measure something in a more fine-tuned way, we're going to get better results. Then we have a tool that we can use as we continue this N of 1 experiment called our bodies and maintaining them with the best health that we have.
Eric, as a trained professional, why is it we're so much more capable of spotting cognitive decline in others and incapable of seeing us?
I think there are a lot of factors that play into that, Wayne. But I think one right at the outset is that one of the most common types of cognitive decline is memory loss. And memory loss comes with its own paradox, which is you don't remember all the stuff you're forgetting. So you lack insight. But beyond that, I think the problem is that these changes happen so subtly that therein lies the difficulty. If you drink 1 can of a sugary beverage, it's not going to do anything for your long-term health. But if you drink 3 cans every day for the next 30 years, it will wreck you. Making the choice once doesn't have any long-term consequences, but it's the compound effect over time, to borrow one of Darren Hardy's terms. It's the additive effect of all those little choices that get us into trouble, and therein lies the reason that it's hard to see some of these things. We change slowly, almost imperceptibly, and it's difficult for us to have perspective on that unless we're measuring things. It's one of the reasons that we help people do cognitive tests that are very fine-tuned and measure things so that we can see things years before they become a problem. It's one of the reasons that we look at biomarkers and track lifestyle habits and help people know how to pay attention to those things that really will sink their ship 20 or 30 years from now if they're inattentive to it. And that provides for some interesting conversations and even criticism. Sometimes I hear people say, you can't get humans to be proactive. The way to help someone be proactive about their health is to connect it to something they deeply want today. People want to have better energy. People want to be able to go to work and do really well and feel like they're thinking clearly, their words are flowing smoothly, they're accomplishing the things that they need to, and their energy is consistent throughout the day, and they want to be able to get home and play with their children or grandchildren, pay attention to their spouse or significant other, or do the hobbies they enjoy, instead of coming home so depleted and exhausted that they can hardly do anything. If you can help people understand that getting those outcomes are exactly what you have to do to also prevent cognitive decline later in life and to prevent physiological deterioration that's so bad that you're institutionalized, then you can help people be proactive. So I know that's a roundabout way of answering your original question, but I hope that gives some helpful perspective.
I thought it was clear. Something that I love, if you're in the internet, or even more, you're in small business in the internet, everyone has a supplement that for only $50 a month is going to change everything. Cure cancer, weight loss, grow hair. It's a circus. Instead, we have the most biologically productive waste in our system. No one has more vitamins in our waste than ever before. I don't want to waste money, but I don't want to have bad health. What are those 2 bookends? Walk me through that if you could. As far as
Sure, Wayne. First of all, I'm both a big fan of supplements and a big critic of supplements because I think people use them all wrong. And a lot of it, as you suggested, is driven by marketing. Most people buy a supplement because of the outcome that it purports to give you. So there are all kinds of supplements out there that have these special proprietary blends to try to help you boost your brain functioning, for example. And if you look at the list of ingredients, you often see things that actually show up in the research, and they might be really good things. But to put all of those things in one pill requires substandard dosing. Some of those ingredients actually do move the needle for people, but you would have to take a lot more than would allow you to pack all those other things in the pill. And so that's a little bit of a sham. There's also the fact that when supplements go through third-party testing, they have between 0 and 500% of what's on the label. So that's an issue. That's why if we do recommend a supplement, we prefer things that have had third-party testing and we have a sense of what's actually in there and that we've avoided impurities, because sometimes they make their way into things. And there's also the simple fact that one symptom might have 20 or 30 different potential root causes. What matters is what's causing that symptom for you. People look at a supplement advertisement and they say, well, I have that symptom and it's supposed to do this thing, therefore I'll try it. And what do I have to lose except a little bit of money? If you rinse and repeat that over and over, you're going to be losing a lot of money. Sometimes I have people come to our office. Most of the clients that we work with don't even live in our U.S. state. We work with people all over the country. So they might show up in a Zoom office hours, literally with a shopping bag full of supplements and say, should I be taking these things? Let me offer you a little bit different view about how to supplement. First of all, supplements are supplemental. Ideally, we would get most of the things that we need from the way that we eat and the way that we live. Now, I realize that there are problems with our food supply, that there are a lot of things that are compromised. The soils that foods are grown in are depleted of essential nutrients. We may be nutrient deficient, and what we're eating can affect what's in the body. The ideal way to deal with things is to measure biomarkers that we know are important for how our bodies and brains function, do a blood test, and say, what does this person need? We do this all the time, and so I meet with people constantly about it. And just yesterday, I met with a few different clients, and a couple of them had really low magnesium levels. Magnesium is essential for brain health and heart health, so we made specific recommendations about what to supplement and even a type of magnesium that has some evidence that it likely gets past the blood-brain barrier, and it's not likely to cause you to have raging diarrhea like certain types of magnesium would. There was another client that I met with who had very optimal levels of magnesium, and we said, that's not something that you need to supplement. When you start working through things and you individually dose things, you also run into the issue that, take vitamin D3, for example. I have some clients who need to take 20,000 IUs of D3 every day just to be at an optimal level of between 60 and 80 nanograms per deciliter. And I have other clients that can take 2,000 IUs a day and achieve that target because they have genetic differences. They absorb things differently. And I have one client, I've had one in about the last 8 years, who actually has an optimal vitamin D3 level without supplementing. She just spends enough time in the sun that her body naturally produces that. So the recommendation to her is keep it up. You don't need to supplement. But most of us can't get enough of that very important hormone if we're not supplementing. But the question is, how much do you need? If we circle back to these multivitamins assume that everyone needs the same levels of every ingredient. When you're doing blood tests, you find out that's just not true. People don't need this ingredient. They need double the amount of that one on the label, and they need about half of this other one. When you go from there, you start to appreciate the complexity of it. People need personalized medicine. They don't need a one-size-fits-all approach. And for $19.95 a month on a subscription basis, I can solve all your problems. That's not true. That's just not realistic.
So Alzheimer's, that's one of the most well-known forms of dementia. Why is that called the diabetes of the brain? Is that an insulin thing on the go, or what's the story behind that concept?
I love that you ask, is that an insulin thing? Because type 2 diabetes really should be called hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood. Because that's the root cause of the problem. That elevated insulin level shows up sometimes decades before the pancreas gives up and says, well, I can't keep up with all of this onslaught of sugar. And you can't make enough insulin to deal with all of that sugar and deliver it to the cell. And so then your blood glucose levels start to rise. But in order for a cell to function correctly, one of the conditions that must be met is that you have to get fuel into the cell so that mitochondria, the powerhouse, can convert that fuel into ATP, the chemical currency of energy. And what we see in about 80% of Alzheimer's patients is that they have significant insulin resistance in the brain, which means it's very difficult to deliver glucose into the cell and get converted into energy. If you don't put gas in the tank, the engine just doesn't run. You get people with Alzheimer's that by and large crave sugar. They want a quick fix. They will eat Snickers bars all day long. They will eat 25 cookies a day if you let them. And too many people let them because they think that, well, what do they have to live for anyway? I'll just give them a cookie. It's actually throwing gas on the fire because these are people who are overfed and undernourished. So let me give you an example of insulin resistance. Imagine that you're driving down the highway somewhere and you see a car with its flashers on off to the side and you say, "Can I help you? What's going on?" And they say, "Yeah, we don't have any gas in the tank. We can't make the car go." You say, "Well, I carry extra fuel in my trunk. Let me get my gas can." You walk around the side of their vehicle where their gas tank is, and you look down and say, "Well, you have 6 cans of gas here." They say, "Yeah, but we broke the spout. We can't pour it in. We've tried, and it just runs down the side of the car." That is insulin resistance. You're overfed and undernourished. There's massive amounts of glucose in the bloodstream, but it's not getting into the cell to be converted into energy because the cell is resistant to insulin signaling, and so you can't get it in there. And so what do brain cells do? They say, we need some fuel and we need it fast. And the quickest, easiest way to do that is with something really sugary. So we're going to crave that, and yet we're never going to get there. We're just in a completely deprived state all the time, unless we do something to reestablish insulin sensitivity. And if you have the most common genetic factor that elevates your risk of Alzheimer's disease, it's by no means a foregone conclusion if you have APOE4 genetics that you're going to have Alzheimer's disease. In fact, the disease is largely preventable. But if you have that genetic factor, there are studies showing that by the time a person is in their late 20s or early 30s, you see about a 10% drop in the brain's ability to use glucose that shows up on an FDG PET scan. And that tells us something we can act on. It means this person's natural genetic tendency is toward resistance to insulin signaling. So why don't we leverage the other side of what the body is good at, which is burning fat for fuel? That gets delivered differently if we prioritize keeping our sugars steady and our insulin controlled and our insulin sensitivity very dialed up as we age, then we're going to age differently.
So can you reverse any of this? Obviously, someone that is a severe case, they're almost on death's door. Yeah. But if you know that, geez, I'm predisposed to, not being really healthy, unless of course I change my diet. I think exercise is going to kick in here at any point. Maybe I should be doing things during the day. Some people have fidget spinners, keep their dexterity in their hands, or those Chinese balls, you rotate them, but it keeps your dexterity, your fingers going, right? Is this something that you can go, okay, I know I'm getting close to the cliff. Let's do a turn here so I don't have to go over the cliff?
Yes, absolutely. Most people can reverse these symptoms in a dramatic way. One of the things that changed my opinion about that and helped me have insight was starting with the hardest cases first and then backing out of it. So let me give you an example of what we've now done for almost 9 years. My business partner, Randy, our chief medical officer, had trained with some of the top neurologists and neuroscience researchers on the planet. He had started learning fundamental things about how the brain operates that, if addressed, can allow people, even with advanced neurodegenerative disease, to show improvement. When he and I joined forces, we went all in developing a system, an organized way, if you will, of sorting through all these myriad factors, figuring out what was going on for an individual and helping them deal with those issues. Think of brain health as like a boat. You have a disease like Alzheimer's, your ship is sinking. It's not because you have one hole in the bottom of the boat. It's because you probably have 15 to 30 things going wrong. If you patch one hole, that ship is still going to sink. Our approach, taking a nod from researchers before us, was to measure as many of those holes as we could and patch them at the same time. So I'll tell you about an early client, a man in his late 60s when he came to us, but when he was in his late 50s, he had developed early onset Alzheimer's disease, which means you're younger than age 65. Earlier in life, he was diagnosed as a genius. I probably shouldn't say diagnosed. That's not the right way to look at it. But he went to a psychologist who said, based on this battery of tests, you are a literal genius. And that genius became a very successful engineer. But by the time he was in his late 50s, he lost his job because he couldn't remember things. He couldn't do basic calculations. He was struggling. And he went to a neurologist who said, I'm so sorry, you have early onset Alzheimer's disease. He went to a second neurologist to get another opinion. Same diagnosis. He went to a third neurologist, and after the same diagnosis, he turned to the neurologist and he said, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I live with this? The neurologist told him, you need to get yourself a really good attorney and make sure that your wife has access to all of your resources. She can control things because in the next few years, you probably won't even know who she is. So you need to wind down things in your life and prepare for the inevitable. And he told me later that he felt like someone just slapped him across the face. When he came to our office, because a relative of his knew what we did baseline cognitive testing. We did a really advanced cognitive test. It's been administered over 20 million times in the last 2 decades. It's used at a lot of research institutions. So we have a lot of data points to compare to. This genius, on his composite memory score, scored in the 8th percentile. His other cognitive scores were very poor. We looked at nutrients, we looked at hormones, we looked at inflammatory markers, we looked at metabolic factors. We helped him change his diet. We helped him get more physically active. We supplemented areas where he had clear-cut deficits. Within 3.5 months, that composite memory score in the 8th percentile went to the 92nd percentile. No joke. And that's not an isolated case. We've seen that over and over. And we started seeing that so much in Alzheimer's patients where they weren't cured, but they had clear-cut improvement and their lives were better. They recognized their families better. Their verbal skills went up. Their processing speeds were improved. Their gait was better. We started seeing these improvements, and that naturally led to their family members saying, wow, you just helped my mom add 10 points on a 30-point cognitive test over 6 months. What could you do for my brain? I was in a car wreck 2 years ago, and I've never been the same since. That led to doing fellowships on post-concussion syndrome and traumatic brain injury and learning some of the nuances of that. And little by little, we started helping people of all ages. If someone starts when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, before there's serious cognitive decline, then Alzheimer's is mostly preventable. We can move the needle so much that people get way better results. Usually we can help people get their cognitive scores up 20 to 30% in a matter of a few months by pulling those right levers. If someone has a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, it refers to the degree that cognitive impairment is impacting your ability to manage your own activities of daily living. By the time someone is diagnosable, they've usually lived with a disease like Alzheimer's for 20 or more years. Alzheimer's pathology starts 20 plus years before symptoms ever show up. So by the time it's diagnosable, it's kind of like stage 3 cancer. It's pretty serious. And in those cases, almost always, we can get people back to completely normal cognitive scores if they'll just apply the right interventions. If someone has more advanced disease, like they already have an Alzheimer's diagnosis or a Lewy body dementia diagnosis, almost always the least we can do is stabilize somebody, help them be more stable and have a better experience with the disease. About 75% of the time, we can reverse symptoms to one degree or another. They can show clear-cut improvement. And if we can do that and help people stay in their own homes and maintain their independence, then we're helping them live better and have more quality to their life.
Quick question here. There's a movie out, I think it's called Limitless. It's sci-fi. And someone takes a combination of a pill, boom, his memory just quadruples. He becomes a rock star in doing things, understanding things. I know that's sci-fi, make believe. But is there something that we could do every day, even if we're not impaired, but improve where we're at? So in other words, your cognitive level, your 80th, 90th percentile, and this will just tweak it, sustain, tweak, and increase.
Yeah. Great question. The short answer is there's a lot you can do every day that would make a difference. Let me give you some very actionable things that apply to anybody, because a lot of what drives decline over time are lifestyle factors. If I had to pick one lifestyle factor that would make a bigger difference than anything else, I would pick sleep. The reason for that is if you go one day without exercise, nothing bad happens. Some people have gone years without exercise, and bad things do happen from that, but one day won't wreck you. If you go one day without eating, there are actually some good things that start to happen physiologically. And if you're not used to fasting, you might be hangry and struggle a little bit, but nothing bad happens. But if you go one day without sleep, one 24-hour period without sleep, there's not one of us that isn't wrecked by that. Sleep is critical because that is when the clean cycle of the brain runs. We've learned since about 2014 that when we're asleep, the brain shrinks a little bit, the ventricles open up, the body makes about 1.5 cups of new cerebrospinal fluid and bathes the brain in that fluid. There's this rhythmic pumping motion that research from a couple of months ago showed is slow wave norepinephrine that allows us to pump up cellular waste, debris, and misfolded proteins. They enter channels that then flush out into the lymphatic system. If you are not sleeping 7 to 8 hours and getting good, deep, restful sleep where you're cycling through all stages, then the lymphatic system is not running. If you don't take the garbage out, it piles up. And you start to get issues like amyloid beta protein or tau protein that show up in the Alzheimer's brain, or issues with alpha-synuclein like you see in Parkinson's disease. Sleep and prioritizing that matters. One of the most commonly overlooked things is that most people have not been screened for sleep apnea. Regardless of your size, you could be 95 pounds and still have obstructive sleep apnea, especially if your tongue is much larger relative to the size of your airway. It doesn't take a lot to block that airway as things relax as you're lying there sleeping. If you have not been screened for sleep apnea, get screened for it. Many people are undiagnosed. If you have sleep apnea, it's the equivalent of a concussion every night of your life. Nobody would ever allow someone to put their hands around their neck and just squeeze for 8 hours a day and cut off their oxygen level. We all know what happens when you deprive tissue of oxygen. The tissue dies. So if you haven't been screened, get screened. Prioritize your sleep. Sleep is not for the weak. You have to sleep to be superior. So that's number one. Any thoughts on that before I give you 2 and 3?
I appreciate a good night's sleep, and I know all about sleep apnea. My wife said, listen, the chainsaw can stop, please.
All right. Well, if I have to pick a couple of other things, I would pick exercise next. People think that they need to exercise so that they look good in a bathing suit. I think exercise than anything is what we do to keep our brains and our hearts healthy. Exercise improves blood flow, and you can't have a good brain and a good heart and a good body without excellent blood flow, delivering all of those nutrients and oxygen to the cells so that we can produce good energy. And exercise releases a growth factor for brain cells called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of it as like miracle grow for brain cells. So that's pretty critical. And people ask me all the time, should I do cardiovascular exercise or should I do strength training? And the answer is yes. I love how my business partner puts it, though, when people say, "What exercise should I do?" And he says, "Start with whatever you will consistently stick with." So if you love playing tennis, then play lots of tennis. Live an active lifestyle. And a lot of busy entrepreneurs say, "I'd love to do that, but I don't have time beyond about a 30-minute quick workout in the morning." Which means that if they go to the gym and work out for 30 minutes and then sit at a desk all day, that is what's called an active couch potato. The longer you sit, the more your insulin sensitivity starts to drop and other physiological changes occur, including lack of blood flow. Just take exercise snacks once an hour. Get up for 3 to 5 minutes and do things like jump a fake rope, do jumping jacks, 20 or 30 push-ups. Get on an exercise bike for 3 minutes and just crank away. Or walk around the block a few times. Go up and down stairs. Do air squats. Use your creativity and work different parts of your body. If you do that once an hour for just 3 minutes, the long-term results are likely better than just going to the gym for 30 or 60 minutes in the morning and then sitting at a desk all day. Motion is lotion in a lot of different ways for our bodies. The third thing I would mention is be careful about what you eat. There are a lot of forces vying for the perfect diet for humans. If you think that there is one diet that is perfect for every human on the planet, then you probably don't know very much about physiology, because humans are far more complex than that. And I can tell you that an 80-year-old that's been sedentary for 40 years and needs to lose 300 pounds and has advanced neurodegenerative disease is not metabolically in the same state as my 16-year-old son who runs cross-country and track and thinks nothing of going out and doing a 10-mile run. So we need to fuel our bodies based on principles. There are a lot of principles. I'll give you just a few quick ones. Number one, eat real food. One thing that all the dietary tribalists can agree on is that ultra-processed food is a horrible disaster, and it's wrecked our health. Things like high fructose corn syrup, which can only be processed in the liver, have led to 40% of adults in the Western world having non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And in the 70s, not that long ago, when I was a kid, nobody had fatty liver except raging alcoholics. Doctors literally never saw it. That one thing has just caused all sorts of downstream consequences, and it's wrecked our health. So eat real food. If it's in the form that you find it in nature, is good for food as long as it's not covered in a bunch of chemicals, which is a whole separate discussion. And then beyond that, make sure that whatever you're doing dietarily, it's controlling your glucose levels, because elevated glucose damages the tissues of the body. Be thoughtful about where your A1C is. Be thoughtful about where your fasting insulin is. Those are pretty early markers. Insulin directly contributes to the world's biggest killer, heart disease. There are 6 or more direct causal factors that insulin does that would cause a person to develop heart disease. So whatever you do, control sugar and insulin. And make sure that you're eating the rainbow. A diversity of fibers is what feeds the bacteria of the gut. Now, beyond that, there's lots of personalization. Avocados are brain food, and I eat an avocado every day. But if you have something like mast cell activation and you're really sensitive to histamine, and you eat an avocado, which is a high histamine food, it might wreck you. It's not very good for you. So find out what your body needs to function optimally, and you might need to work with someone to sort through some of those things. But you can also learn to pay attention and listen to what your body's telling you as you try different things and see what works for you. List.
So the takeaway I've got is Eric says Snickers are food. Maybe I got that wrong.
It's okay, Wayne. There is help. I promise we can help. Let's talk after the show.
How big is your geography for your client base? And how do we reach you?
Yeah, I'm going to give you 2 answers for that. When people are really participating in the enhanced protocol, which is our organized system for finding out what your body needs, then we have to do blood work. And right now, our contracts only allow us to operate in the United States. If someone wants to be part of our membership, which is $25 a month, and it gives you access to online office hours where you can talk to me, our medical director, our nurse. You can ask questions, bring blood work from your doctor's office and say, help me understand. That's available to anybody that speaks English anywhere in the world. If people want to know more, I would direct them to amindforallseasons.com. We put together something completely free that might be helpful to anybody listening. It's a brain energy self-assessment that would ask you questions about lifestyle factors, symptomatic factors, and then it would also allow you to plug in any biomarkers that you already know, because maybe you went to your doctor's office for a checkup and you got some things tested. And if you want to take a self-assessment like that, it'll take you about 10 minutes. Go to amindforallseasons.com/energy, and you just put in your basic demographic information, and name and an email address, and then you can take that self-assessment and get some results from that. And just doing that will allow you to learn some important things.
I want to say thank you to Eric Collette, my co-host, Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. So this hopefully will have alleviated some fog around things like Alzheimer's, etc. Eric is committed to helping business owners and professionals overcome their mental fatigue, cognitive decline, sharing simple stuff. And, from what we've heard, there's a multitude of things that can influence what's happening inside your body, from genetics to what you're exposed to on a daily basis. But the whole goal is to improve your brain function and those around you. Eric's passionate about this, and it's a lifelong learning journey. Reach out to Eric if you need more information.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATISIGH.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from @Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.